and welcome back to the hardware news recap for the week. This is going to be a different episode for you. We're at the end of Computex 2024, and we have some interesting news. So first of all, a really brief update on the ASUS situation. We've been posting community posts for the last week or so, and we had a meeting with people from ASUS. So that's going to be a separate video, but I'll have a quick update for you here. Additionally, we have some stories from the week that we didn't report on during Computex, such as the NVIDIA Antitrust investigation by the FTC and the U.S. Department of Justice. And additionally, we have stories remaining from Cooler Master with the MasterHub, talking about the SDK work they're doing, which is great, and Be Quiet with its new cases. So let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by Lian Li and the O11D Evo RGB case. The O11D Evo RGB is an updated entry to the famed O11 lineup, retaining heavy support for fan mounts, drive mount locations, and flexibility on component mounting, such as two options for the power supply. The O11D Evo RGB's dual chamber approach aims to maximize cable storage on the backside to streamline cable management, coupling this with a unique vertical GPU mount to showcase the most expensive part in most systems. Learn more at the link in the description below. All right, let's start with ASUS. So we posted several community posts throughout the last week where we were talking about the goings-on with ASUS and how we're continuing that storyline. We took several requests and demands to the company, trying to seek some answers, some accountability, and ultimately trying to help ASUS improve its customer service, because my firm belief is that if ASUS improves, all of its competitors will have to improve as well, because it is the market leader for motherboards and for other devices. So that's just the way it goes. If they want to compete, they'll have to compete with number one, and ASUS improving should help the whole industry. I won't spoil it or get into deeper details here because we have a whole video coming up for that. It should be kind of the last in the series for now, unless we have follow-ups later, which eventually we will. But to get into some of the basics of it, initially our first meeting was with marketing, which felt like ASUS was really just throwing someone out to the camera to say, hey, go deal with Steve. Not necessarily the right guy, but as the director of marketing, he had some indirect control over what was going on, but not enough power to make some firm commitments. So we pushed repeatedly in that meeting. Again, I'm not going to spoil it at all because it's going to require a lot of work to finalize and put together everything. We did get to the head of customer service, which is exactly the person we need to talk to. And the head of customer service reports directly to the CEO. So this is someone with some power. This is something we were worried about, is if they just throw someone out there to try and market the problem away, and ASUS did eventually take it seriously. So we'll talk about that in the standalone video. Now, although there were instances of the discussion that we'd consider to be borderline contentious or that reflect poorly on ASUS, we were also able to come to several agreements on improvements to the process. GN brought several concrete requests for improvement, some of which we worked on with PIRG's Nathan Proctor and with a lawyer, and ASUS agreed to many of those. It wasn't easy. At times, we still had strong disagreements, but we're happy to share the full discussion and the improvements soon. We're giving ASUS a few days to finalize some of the concrete details, so one of the things we requested will require a standardized form so that they can quickly process their customers' re-requests for warranties and other stuff I'm not going to get into right now. So we're giving them some days to put that together. I do think that for that, at least, we're making some progress, but it's over 3 hours of discussion across 2 days. It was multiple cameras, OBS capture involved for a Teams discussion as well as someone remote, and it's going to be some work to put it together. So we'll do that once we get back. ASUS is planning to get us the information we need for our report on Tuesday. I don't know when this video will go up, but that's when we'll have everything and we'll finalize it, stitch it together, and run it. Okay, next story. So NVIDIA and the antitrust investigation. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, and the U.S. Justice Department actually are both getting involved in an antitrust investigation into NVIDIA, Microsoft, and OpenAI. And Microsoft owns a significant portion of OpenAI. This is reported by the New York Times. So the report claims that NVIDIA has violated antitrust laws and that the FTC's investigation relates to harm caused to the general public and consumers through data harvesting fueling AI projects. Microsoft's 49% ownership of OpenAI is likely part of the cause for their inclusion in the investigation. It's possible that the Justice Department and FTC may be setting the pieces in place for a future monopoly busting move, but who knows? We'll see. This is still a developing market. It is largely single players right now in these spaces. A lot of companies, it's just that the ones that hold all the power are incredibly large. So we'll kind of see what they do for that. And the New York Times wrote this in its report, quote, Microsoft structured its minority stake in OpenAI in part to avoid antitrust scrutiny. Microsoft also reached a deal in March to hire most of the staff of Inflection AI, another AI startup, and license its technology. Because the deal was not a standard acquisition, it may be harder for regulators to scrutinize, end quote. Now, for reference, NVIDIA's market cap currently sits at around $3 trillion as of this past week. Microsoft's is over $3 trillion at the time of writing, and these numbers change all the time, but they're not going to change that much before this airs. So both of these companies are incredibly valuable, to the point of being the most valuable in the world. Up next, a John Petty research report on AMD and NVIDIA market share and shipments of GPUs. So as new GPU architectures loom, we all know 50 series is coming up. The Intel Xe2 future battle mage architecture was also briefly shown this week with some of the first details. We have a separate video on that if you want it. And AMD will eventually make something. There's not a lot of rumors on that one. They might be further out. But either way, there's a new report from JPR, and this notes that the shipments of discrete add-on video cards have declined by 7.9% quarter to quarter. However, JPR reports that the shipments have also increased 39.2% year over year. Quarterly decreases can make sense when exiting peak buying season, but the report indicated an increase in NVIDIA market share specifically, with an 8% jump over last quarter, now to 88% according to JPR. This also came alongside a 7% decrease, according to JPR's same report, for AMD. Intel didn't have any specific news that was meaningful. The company is still small in this space and is not currently of a significant share. Now, JPR also wrote this, quote, AMD's quarter-to-quarter total desktop AIB unit shipments decreased 41% and increased 39% from last year. Now, we previously reported on an AMD statement that it expected, paraphrase, that the AMD Radeon and gaming segment sales would get worse before they get better. Part of this aligns with the console reductions in semi-custom sales because console sales are slowing down. Makes sense. There's eventually going to be mid-generation refreshes. People are probably waiting for those. Also, they're getting a bit long in the tooth now. Now, for the last segment, before we cut to some show floor coverage that we have of Cooler Master and of Be Quiet, Intel appears to be scared of Qualcomm and ARM. So this is something I've talked about with, I think it was 2 people at the show, one of them Leo from Kit Guru, where Intel specifically at its keynote event for all of the new architectures, including Lunar Lake, mentioned explicitly that this is going to be its best x86 CPU ever. Things to the effect of x86 is alive and well. These are statements to the press, and they kept talking about x86, 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 and occasionally referencing ARM to the extent of putting benchmarks from first-party slides on the screen showing ARM comparisons. And this, to me, is an interesting indicator of where Intel's, we'll call it shared headspace, is at, where the company is now considering Qualcomm and ARM solutions to be relevant enough that it has to counter market against them, which almost sort of lends credibility to them.
I just want to put that to bed right now. Ain't true.
I'm not sure where that story is going to go eventually, but it was something I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention because it's an interesting turn of events where Intel typically doesn't really seem to feel a need to talk about x86 or how alive or well it's doing. But let's move over to the Cooler Master MasterHub, their cool passive power supply, and then we'll also talk about Be Quiet's new cases. Okay, so we have a quick kind of on-the-ground news segment in hardware news, but there's a couple things from the Cooler Master headquarters that we didn't show in our case and cooler video. Still wanted to show them though, because there's some cool stuff going on. This is called MasterHub. There's also some power supply stuff we're going to briefly look at and a passive cooler as well. But for MasterHub specifically, this is something that caught our eyes mostly because on the video team, there are a lot of features here that cross over with what could be potentially really useful for us for editing videos. Have to test it to really know, but the idea is a highly configurable, you think of something like the Elgato Stream Deck, for example, except with more function to it, but some of the concept is similar, which is just quick access, keypads and things. So the way this works, I'll just show it physically. So these have, you see this big kind of array of pogo pin to receptors. And if you look at these 2 modules, you'll see that the way it works is this is actually keyed. And so I suppose the way it's communicating to software, what device is where, is through the keying, the location of where this aligns. So that one is going to line up down here, and give us some adjustment knobs you could program to whatever. I mean, for us, this might be something like levels adjustment, might be volume control, boosting, things of that nature in Adobe Premiere. So kind of cool from a physical function standpoint already. This is 2 rollers. Typically, I mean, same thing, you can use rollers for scrubbing playback, you use it for volume, you use it for, I guess, if you wanted to set up to it like a color wheel or adjust or something. But anyway, that's another one of the modules. And they can all be repositioned. So like I said, kind of interesting to us. Down here's a 15 key pad. And so this you program to whatever buttons you might want as quick access. So to give some examples for video editing or Photoshop, maybe you might have something like Lumetri color, Lumetri scopes, copy and paste attributes, for example, things of that nature in Premiere. So anyway, that's kind of how it works on a base level. What's interesting to me, so this actually, maybe I have to show B-roll of it, but it does have some level of detection for orientation where it will adjust on the software here, as you just saw, without a gyroscope. So I'm not sure the specifics of how that's done. Maybe some software developer in the audience can chime in. We'll ask Cooler Master for later as well, but no hardware involved to adjust, which means there's optional layouts with things like this. Anyway, I thought it was really cool. There's a couple different physical components we're gonna go over still, but the way they're selling it is basically a base model with these units included. That's $400. So as usual with this type of gear, it's expensive. The Stream Deck is also crazy expensive. And then they're individually selling modules as well. So this one, for example, is a 3-knob unit. This was $50, wasn't it? And then this one is $30. So that's the cheapest end of things. And then the 15 keypad was $150. So that's going to be in one of the higher ranges. So software support is going to be make or break for this kind of stuff. Cooler Master, as I understand it, was not able to work directly with Adobe, which is, thank you, Adobe, for doing what you do. It's okay, they suck to work with for us too. So Cooler Master has had to build its own support system. Out of the box at launch, they will natively support OBS, Streamlab, Twitch, Discord, Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, and then they want to add to that. But this is the part I really want to talk about, which is, so Wendell and I have been talking about software maintenance long-term for things like RGB devices and sensors, where a lot of manufacturers, the concern we have is they ship something, they get bored of it or it stops selling, and then they abandon it. And if there's no documentation for users to maintain software, it just becomes a brick, which sucks. So I asked Cooler Master about that because that's something I'm asking all the vendors this year. And they are actually going to have an SDK for developers, which is awesome. So that is exactly what I want to see. That's what Wendell and I are pushing for with the OP initiative, to try and get manufacturers on board to provide some level of documentation so stuff doesn't just die when they get bored of it. So that's pretty cool. I was really excited about that, probably more than almost anything else here. And then the last piece on this before we move over to some of the power supply stuff briefly. So some of these have an ARM processor in them. I asked why, like what specifically brings the need for that level of performance in one of the devices for the MasterHub, and the goal is reduction of latency locally on the device, so a little more responsive, things of that nature, and then save some transactions across various buses. And then for profiles, can export and load on different PCs. There is no local storage right now to write to firmware or something, but that's something I brought up as a point of interest for us. So anyway, pretty cool. We'll get some B-roll and show all the various devices in use. But this might be something we actually try out for our editing machines, and if we do, we'll let you all know what we think in the future. Let's move over to some quick power supply stuff. All right, one last thing for the hardware news insert. So the other thing we didn't get to show in our Cooler Master coverage of the cases and the coolers was the power supply stuff. I am not super up to speed on topologies for power supplies, so what I'm going to focus on is the cooling side of one of them. This is a passive power supply solution that Cooler Master has been working on for about 2 years now. Passive power supplies interest us because for our hemianechoic chamber testing we need all passive everything. And so right now the main option is Seasonic. They have like a 700 watt option. It's, I don't remember how much, it's hundreds of dollars. They're all really expensive. There's some lower end options in the market too. So we've been interested in this just for internal use, but the solution here that is the maybe simplest, I guess, is the thermal side. So this was shown years ago. It is not the reason they were held up on design. We'll get to that. But they have a set of heat pipes. It's 4 heat pipes, and they connect to just a cold plate. So not a vapor chamber, just a copper cold plate. This contacts the transformer. And so the question I asked was, in a like-for-like scenario, if you test with the basically aluminum fins on the chassis, the housing of the power supply, and with the heat pipe and cold plate versus without, more standard, what's that difference? And so the answer I got was across all of the tested loads they did, and obviously, we're not going to verify this. We don't really have that capacity right now, but according to Cooler Master across tested loads, it's a 6-degree difference delta T, which I don't know, seems fairly sizable for basically just heat pipes attached to a power supply. But the question I asked was, okay, so we saw this 2 years ago. Why is it taking until now to launch? This doesn't seem like it should be that hard. And the answer was super interesting because it comes down to everything else needing to be passive, where all the internal components of the power supply need to have massive heat sinks to make up for the fact that there's no fan, of course. And so the really interesting discussion from one of the electrical engineers on the team was, because they have these specific needs for very large fin stacks for the power supply components, they end up creating a bunch of antenna within the power supply that causes EMI issues. So they had to design around component placement, component choice, to deal with that EMI while still being able to sink the amount of heat they need to sink without a fan. So I thought that was pretty cool, definitely an educational moment. And then for capacities and other basics, so they're gonna be $550 and $590 for the 850 watt and 1100 watt models respectively. And so that's about all we have for you on this for now. This is the X series of power supplies, and this is the X Silent Edge specifically. So maybe we'll throw one in one of our sound chamber test systems, but otherwise we're not going to be reviewing these just because we don't do PSUs right now. So let's move on to the next story. Hey everyone, so now we're at the Be Quiet booth at Computex 2024, mostly focusing on two variations of a case this time. The case is where I'm most interested. There's a lot of cases this year actually. There's a lot of fish tanks too. They're cases, but anyway, so these are the light-based 600, 900. One's larger, the 900 is the larger of the two. Cases will range from 150 for the 600 up to 195, depending on fan configuration. And then for the 900, that one is gonna range up to $240, depending on the fan config. This, however, is dangerous, first of all. It's hefty. So these are the light strips. They have 1.3 to 1.5 meters of LEDs depending on the case, which is a lot of LEDs. It has a giant diffuser in it, and you end up with the diffuse lighting across the paneling here. So broadly speaking, this is an O11 inspired or Y70 type competitor, C8 competitor. Everybody has some variation of a multi-chamber design now. And what we think it's starting to come down to is this is now an archetype. So in other words, if you look at the Y60, the Y70, that's becoming its own archetype of shaved corner case. The O11 defined an entire archetype after the Air 540, actually more than a decade ago, and now it's starting to evolve in a couple different ways. Be Quiet is primarily different because it is invertible, so we actually have a shot of it being inverted by Be Quiet, but this is the key component to it. So that is one of the case feet. It basically locks in. You can see that plastic piece there that bites. It turns and you flip it. So feet come off the case, flip it over, screw them back in, and then now it's inverted layout case. A lot easier than it used to be with, say, I think it was the original 900, not the light-based 900, where it was a lot of screws to invert the older cases. So anyway, that's kind of a key feature. Otherwise, there's this layout. It's the same case on its side. You don't lose any compatibility or functionality because it's just rotated, and then it has these feet here on the side panel to give it something to stand against. So while we're looking at the side panel though, let's pull this. See if I can do this without causing problems and without flipping off the camera. Now we're gonna have to censor. Demonetized. So side panel, already a more rigid structure than what we saw on the 6500 that we reviewed just recently. So large dust filter with a plastic basically membrane in place to hold everything in. One of the things you have to watch out for is filter sag over time, especially with fans nearby. So the plastic actually does serve a purpose. Have to be careful not to go to Y60 levels of just eating half of the total porosity with the plastic frame to support it all. This is held in magnetically. We've got shots of that too. Backside, if we look at this, so in the current configuration, power supply is oriented back here. There's a drive cage. They do have a BTF support. There's an optional drive cage that can be installed inward more into the secondary chamber. If using BTF, you lose that option. However, it's not, as I understand it, included with the case. And then this pops out and is just a cable cover. So pretty simple, basically ball joint type of mushroom head. Pop to hold it into place. So for key differences between them, obviously size. So the 900 is a larger case. The 600 loses some height and it comes back a little bit. And then otherwise, the 900 includes fan trays. So down here you can see this bracket or the tray for fan and radiator. The fan size is different, so the same count of fans. The 600 is 120s. The 900 is 140s, and then otherwise just radiator support as you would expect. Last couple things. So release target is going to be October, and actually there's a lot of cases coming out towards the back end of the year here, so case reviews are going to be slammed for us. But October for the release target. The top and the bottom panels are symmetrical, which is necessary for the inversion to look good or work, actually. There's 2 hubs as well. One located top, one located bottom, also for symmetry for the inversion. I think that pretty much covers this case. Power supplies have long had a standardization problem, which is that the cable that goes into the power supply is not standard. And as we've said for years, you can't just hot swap them between PSUs. It's actually one of the most common reasons that people blow up their SSDs, because they'll pull a SATA cable from one power supply, it fits in the other one, it blows it up. The way around that is continuity testing, which you can do manually with a digital multimeter. It's not too hard, it's just kind of a pain in the ass because there's so many pins. So Thermaltake has an update to its Dr. Power supply tester. I have some extremely old power supply testers, but this one is updated to fit 12 volt high power, and then it's got this button here to cycle through all the options. So with this test, it's 12 volt, 5 volt, 3.3, 5 volt standby, and then power good signal. And then you can cycle through all the buttons to check the continuity. And also it's supposed to pick up the sense pin presence on the 12 volt high power, 12 plus 4 pin connector. So in theory, if the cable's wired properly, assuming they meet the cable spec, then it should be able to pick up 150, 300, 450, 600 watts. There's a lot of caveats there with 12 volt high power cable construction. Won't get into it today. But anyway, this we will probably be buying one. It's a $50 power supply tester. It looks for, like I said, continuity, which means if the cable is not appropriate for the power supply that's plugged into on the other end, so it goes from power supply into the tester, it'll just spit out a red signal, say, hey, this is no good, and it's not supposed to send a load down it, so it will not just blow stuff up. It's just going to tell you good or not. I like that. It kind of helps resolve the problem of the non-standardized power supply pins. But let's go look at the vapor chamber prototype. Okay, so for the vapor chamber, this is called Project Trinity 3D VC air cooler. 3D means 3 dimensions. Just as a recap, the way vapor chambers are constructed, they have these little copper columns, the little copper cylinder discs that stack, and that adds surface area. It also adds rigidity, and normally they're sintered internally. The problem with vapor chambers is normally just, well, it's 2 things for air coolers. It's cost, and then it's also the flatness of the cold plate, because those columns create these divots in the bottom of the cold plate, which is one of the reasons we've really only seen a couple of vapor chamber coolers over the years, but people are starting to try it again, like Deep Cool, because there's enough power load from things like Intel CPUs, and then also just because the price creep in general means now there's more room for a more expensive air cooler. So what I was telling Thermaltake is the biggest thing I would like to see is basically the kind of Deep Cool approach, except without that screen on it, because that's going to add a lot of cost to it. There's no way they're under $100 unless they also drop the Assassin 4 price for the Deep Cool one. So hopefully this can come in below that. They don't have a price yet. They don't have a release date. They're thinking hopefully next year, but nothing finalized yet. And then otherwise, it's a relatively thick single tower vapor chamber cooler, and we're gonna move on to the next one. Okay, so now we're at the AX700. Thermaltake has remembered why large cases exist. This is one of the things we talked about in the Corsair 6500 review, where companies are still making massive cases, but they've forgotten why we ever made them to begin with, because multi-GPU is largely gone. You can still use it in workstation. Gaming is mostly out. People don't really do a lot of drive cases anymore. This is supposed to be a workstation case. I think they might be branding it as an AI workstation case, but buzzwords aside, the point is you can put a very large computer in it. So for the setup, on this side, they've got a maximum of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 3.5-inch hard drives. There might be space for one more up here if you didn't do any top-mounted components. And on the backside, there's a couple 3.5-inch spots also. So basically a large vertical rail. If you wanted to do like a NAS or something, this is kind of the direction you would go. And then here is a vertical support bar for GPUs, so some adjustment space. This case is interesting to me. It might be something we would use for like an office mini server just for the drive storage alone, but they've currently got 2 cards in here. There are 10 PCIe expansion slots, which is a huge amount of expansion slots. Normally you see like 7, sometimes 8. So the 10 there, and then they have 2 verticals. And then for the back, they've got a 140 in there right now. And then you can see this ginormous motherboard mounted in the case. So one of the things that I liked about the case was generally just the mechanics of it. So the swivel's pretty smooth, but they have this rubberized foam pad just for damping when it closes, which should reduce some of the vibration too, and then a turn lock there for that. Swing around the back here. On this side, there is just a handle to pull and release. The panel opens up. They have fully perforated the side panel. Porosity here is excellent. So Thermaltake has massive holes punched out. Some of the times we see more metal than we do hole for these panels. So overall, definitely the right direction. On the back, there are 2 rails which are currently secured with screws just because it's a trade show. But the idea of them is there's this lever up here. There's one on the other side. You push it in, and then with one depressed here, we'd be able to hinge it out. Or if you do both, obviously it just pulls out fully. Currently this is completely wired up, so I'm not gonna try and move it. But the other hard drive cage options are back here. I don't know right now how many total you can do. We also don't have a price. We don't have a release date yet because they're still finalizing things. They're hoping for maybe Q4. On the rails, one of the smaller attention to detail things I liked where they've got the actual fan size stamped into the metal of the fan tray. So this would be a 200 if you align with these 2 holes here. So you can throw, I don't know if it'd be like maybe 2 to max 3. It's probably 2, but 200s on the back, 140s and 120s. And I mean, that covers most of the case. All right, so this one they're calling a travel case. I have a couple points of feedback I want to provide on this because I like some of the concept of it. I think there's a few key areas that they can make some tweaks and improvements for the travel side of it. But we'll start with the basics first. Thermaltake's targeting $120 for this mini ITX box, and they've got magnetic panels everywhere. So all this is magnet with hinge on the bottom. And then internally, it's a back-to-back design. So the GPU is on this compartment. It's a 3-slot GPU up to 360 mil length. And then there's a support structure down here for the card to support it vertically. So for the motherboard tray back here, this pulls out with magnets also. They've got 4 totals, 2 on each side, dust filter. Again, relatively large ventilation and porosity looks good. So this is something I keep bringing it up with Thermaltake because years ago they really struggled with this. And I have seen now, I think 2, maybe 3 years in a row of improvement on the actual thermal side of the Thermaltake, which is good. So I want to keep drawing attention to that when the companies improve stuff. Motherboard tray seated back, so there's a mini ITX power supplies up front, and then they're running an extension cable, which you see spitting out right here. So that's the extension of the power supply. And otherwise internally, I think you can do up to a 280 up top. And then for the rest of the case, so I said I had a couple areas of feedback, things I'd like to see. One of them is just because it's a travel case, the magnets they're great. However, with a travel case, I'd like to see just a screw somewhere just to secure all these panels. So maybe back here, punch a screw in, maybe for the top panel as well. Just so if someone is legitimately using it to move around and travel, it can hold everything securely. There is space in this indent where the door pulls. I think they could try and get some kind of handle in there to support it, have it be a separate thing. You can take it off if it's stationary. So those are the 2 areas I'd like to see maybe some additions. But one of the things that Thermaltake's already changing is actually going to be this width of the case, where currently they want to kick it out a little wider. So it will be, currently it's about 15-ish liters. It'll get a little bit larger than that. And the reasoning is to try and support, hopefully, in the 70s millimeter range of cooler clearance for the CPU cooler. That's kind of the TR100. I think I already said this, $120 is the target, and release Q4. That's going to be it for hardware news this week. Honk's over here for AI, and check in for the rest of our show coverage. It's all on the channel now. We have a couple of really good discussions and interviews coming up, and thank you all for watching. Subscribe for more. Thanks for supporting us during the show. We love reporting on it. Ton of fun. way higher pace than typically, and now we're slowly going to be working back towards the long-form content, some of the testing, the reviews, the reports, the investigations, and the discussions. So check back for all that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.